"Get off this plane now! Your kind doesn't belong in first class!" The words sliced through the morning air at JFK International Airport like a razor, sharp enough to freeze every conversation in Terminal 4. But what happened next would demolish the aviation industry's carefully constructed walls of discrimination and expose a system of prejudice that had operated in shadows for decades. Zara Anderson stood in the eye of the hurricane, her composed expression masking the storm building within. At 42, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that comes from transforming nothing into everything, though nobody in that crowded gate area could have imagined the empire she had built from Detroit's toughest streets. Her simple grey hoodie and worn jeans suggested just another traveler catching the 8:15 a.m. flight to Chicago. But the woman beneath that modest exterior owned every seat, every plane, and every policy of the airline that was about to destroy itself trying to humiliate her. The morning sun streamed through the terminal's massive windows, casting long shadows across passengers hurrying to their gates with coffee cups and rolling luggage. Business travelers checked their phones obsessively, families corralled restless children, and the usual symphony of gate announcements echoed through the concourse. Nobody suspected they were about to witness the most spectacular corporate reversal in aviation history. What made the irony complete was that Zara had built Skylink Airways from a failing regional carrier into America's most profitable airline through 15 years of strategic acquisitions and relentless focus on customer service. She had personally written the diversity policies that her employees were about to violate so spectacularly, had funded the sensitivity training they had obviously ignored, and had created the very company culture they were about to poison with their actions. The boarding announcement for Skylink Airways Flight 447 crackled over the intercom, and Zara approached the gate counter with her first-class boarding pass, unaware she was walking into the very discrimination she had spent years trying to eliminate. In 3 hours, she would sit in a boardroom in Chicago and make decisions affecting thousands of employees worldwide. But first, she would discover exactly what those employees thought of passengers who looked like her. Sarah Mitchell glanced up from her computer terminal with the kind of practiced disdain that 5 years in airline customer service had refined to an art form. At 28, she had perfected the subtle once-over that could reduce passengers to their perceived social status with a single glance. Her blue eyes swept from Zara's casual clothing to her boarding pass and back again, skepticism deepening with each assessment. The morning rush always brought interesting challenges, but this felt different somehow. Sarah had earned Employee of the Month honors 3 times running for her attention to detail and commitment to maintaining standards, corporate euphemisms that everyone understood, but nobody discussed openly. She took pride in her ability to spot passengers who didn't quite fit Skylink Airways' unspoken passenger profile. "Excuse me, but are you absolutely certain this ticket belongs to you?" Sarah's voice carried just enough suspicion to turn heads throughout the gate area. The question hung between them like an accusation, loaded with implications that everyone present understood, but nobody dared voice directly. Zara's response came with the patience of someone who had navigated these treacherous waters countless times before. "Yes, I purchased it online last night. Is there some kind of problem?" Her voice remained level and professional, though her analytical mind was already documenting every detail. Sarah's body language, the growing crowd of onlookers, the subtle shift in atmosphere that always preceded these confrontations. Behind her, a well-dressed white businessman approached with an identical first-class boarding pass. Sarah's entire demeanor transformed instantly, her smile brightening as she processed his ticket without a single question. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Patterson. Thank you for choosing Skylink Airways today." The contrast was so stark, it felt deliberately theatrical, and whispers began rippling through the assembled passengers like stones thrown into still water. "It's just that we've been having issues with fraudulent tickets recently," Sarah continued, her fingers moving across the keyboard with exaggerated deliberation. "Especially in first class. I'm going to need to verify several additional details." The way she emphasized first class made her meaning crystal clear. This wasn't about ticket fraud. It was about who deserved to sit in premium seats. Each keystroke seemed performed for maximum dramatic effect, as if Sarah were being forced to waste precious time on someone unworthy of basic courtesy. She called over her colleague Jennifer Martinez, who watched the interaction with the fascination of someone witnessing a familiar ritual. Around them, the morning crowd continued to grow, some passengers checking their watches impatiently, while others sensed they were witnessing something significant. "Ma'am, I'm going to need additional identification and perhaps the credit card used for this purchase," Sarah announced loudly enough to ensure maximum audience participation. Each request was more invasive than the last, each one applied selectively to a demographic of one. Zara complied with every demand, her composure never wavering even as the requirements grew increasingly unreasonable. She observed how other passengers, uniformly white, passed through without scrutiny, their humanity never questioned, their right to occupy first-class seats never doubted. With each passing minute, she was unwittingly building the evidence that would soon shatter everything these employees believed about power, privilege, and consequences. Mark Thompson emerged from the administrative office with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to having the final word on matters he barely comprehended. At 35, his rise to supervisor had been fueled by mediocrity, disguised as leadership, and the kind of aggressive confidence that often substitutes for actual competence in corporate hierarchies. His appearance at the gate shifted the entire dynamic, transforming a routine interaction into a public spectacle. His morning had begun routinely enough, reviewing overnight incident reports, checking staffing levels, preparing for another day of managing what he considered the airline's most challenging resource, passengers who didn't understand their place in the travel ecosystem. He had resolved dozens of similar situations over the years, almost always with the same outcome. The problematic passenger would eventually accept reality and seek alternative transportation. What exactly is the issue here? Mark's question was directed at Sarah, but his cold assessment remained fixed on Zara like a security scanner. When Sarah whispered her concerns that seemed to multiply and intensify with each retelling, Mark nodded with the gravity of someone confronting a genuine threat to aviation security. The psychology of the moment worked perfectly from Mark's perspective. He possessed institutional authority, employee backup, and the implicit support of passengers who simply wanted to board their flights without delay. Zara appeared to be exactly what she seemed, a lone traveler with no visible influence or power, the kind of person who could be processed through the system without meaningful resistance or consequence. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside so we can follow additional security protocols," Mark announced with the authority his position theoretically granted him. The protocols he referenced existed nowhere in Skylink Airways' official documentation, but they were as real as company policy to employees who had been selectively applying them for years. Around them, the gate area buzzed with increasing energy. Business travelers checked their phones anxiously, worried about connections and meetings. Others pulled out devices to record, sensing something newsworthy developing. A few passengers, mostly people of color, watched with the weary recognition that comes from personal experience with exactly this type of scenario. "I understand you have procedures to follow," Zara replied, allowing just enough edge into her voice to suggest that her patience, while substantial, was not limitless. "But I'm curious why these same protocols weren't required for the gentleman who just boarded, or the woman before him, or anyone else in this line besides me." Her words cut through the terminal's ambient noise with surgical precision, and several passengers began paying closer attention to the unfolding drama. The question exposed the selective nature of the security theater with uncomfortable clarity, and Mark felt his first flutter of genuine unease. Mark's face flushed slightly, but he responded with the kind of aggressive deflection that bullies employ when their tactics are challenged. "Ma'am, if you're going to be difficult about standard security measures, perhaps you'd be more comfortable flying with a different carrier. We take passenger safety very seriously here at Skylink Airways." The irony of those words, spoken to the woman who had personally implemented every legitimate safety protocol the airline followed, was lost on everyone present except Zara herself. She made a mental note to review the training materials that had obviously failed to reach their intended audience, while simultaneously cataloguing the systematic nature of discrimination that was revealing itself with each passing moment. Tom Rodriguez approached the gate with the confident swagger of private security, his hand resting meaningfully on the radio clipped to his tactical belt. At 41, 15 years of airport security work had given him the selective vision necessary to identify threats in the most innocuous circumstances. His arrival signaled an escalation that everyone understood. This situation had moved beyond boarding passes and identification into something much more serious. The morning shift had been routine until this point. Tom had handled the usual complications: forgotten identification, oversized carry-ons, minor disputes between passengers. But this felt different. He could sense tension radiating from the growing crowd, could feel the weight of smartphone cameras pointed in their direction. What he couldn't sense was that he was about to star in the most documented discrimination case in aviation history. "We have a situation developing here," Mark explained with the tone of someone reporting a genuine emergency. "This passenger is refusing to cooperate with our standard security screening procedures." The transformation of Zara's polite compliance into refusal to cooperate would have been remarkable if it weren't so predictable in these circumstances. The gate area was filling with unusual energy as regular travelers put away laptops and newspapers, drawn into the drama like spectators at an unscheduled performance. The normal rushing and jostling had slowed to collective observation, as if everyone present sensed they were witnessing something that would matter beyond this moment. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me for additional screening in a private area," Tom announced with authoritative finality. The suggestion of privacy sounded more like a threat than accommodation, and several passengers began shifting uncomfortably. Everyone understood the implication. Whatever happened next would occur away from witnesses, away from cameras, away from accountability. But Zara had no intention of being disappeared into some back room where her treatment could continue without documentation. "I prefer to handle this matter here, in public view," she stated firmly. "I believe transparency serves everyone's interests more effectively." The crowd continued expanding, and smartphones materialized throughout the terminal like digital flowers blooming in response to conflict. Sarah, perhaps sensing that events were spiraling beyond their control, made a decision that would define the remainder of her career. She activated her phone's live stream function and began broadcasting, dealing with a difficult passenger who seems to have problems understanding basic airline policies. She announced to her growing online audience, "Some people just don't know how to conduct themselves appropriately in professional settings." Her real-time commentary provided a soundtrack to discrimination, broadcast live for global consumption. The humiliation reached its peak when Mark delivered his ultimate ultimatum. "Ma'am, I have the authority to deny you boarding based on disruptive behavior and failure to comply with standard security measures. You need to leave this gate area immediately, or will be forced to contact airport police for assistance." The declaration hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet, and for a moment the entire terminal seemed suspended in anticipation. Passengers who had been attempting to mind their own business found themselves unwilling witnesses to injustice so blatant it demanded acknowledgement. "These procedures appear specifically designed to target certain categories of passengers," Zara observed, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet gate area. "I wonder if your corporate leadership is aware of these creative interpretations of company policy." She retrieved her phone and made a call that would change everything. David, I need complete documentation of everything occurring here. Please prepare the legal materials we discussed. I suspect we'll need them much sooner than anticipated. Her calm tone suggested preparation for something far larger than anyone present could imagine. As the call ended, Zara addressed the assembled crowd with words that would soon echo across social media platforms worldwide. It's fascinating how certain policies seem to apply exclusively to certain people, but I wonder if these employees truly understand who they're dealing with. The question would prove more prophetic than anyone could have imagined, and the answer would arrive with devastating swiftness. The confrontation detonated into complete chaos when David Kim, Skylink Airways regional manager, arrived radiating the righteous indignation typically reserved for genuine crises. At 43, David had constructed his career on customer service principles that mysteriously became flexible depending on customer demographics. The customer was always right, unless the customer happened to challenge his unconscious assumptions about who belonged where. His commute from Westchester had been unremarkable that morning. NPR commentary, premium coffee, routine review of overnight operational reports. Nothing had prepared him for Mark's urgent call requesting immediate assistance with what was being described as a significant security situation at Gate 23. "What's causing this delay?" David demanded, his voice projecting across the gate area with practiced authority. After Mark's hurried briefing about the uncooperative passenger situation, David's expression hardened into something approaching righteous fury. "Ma'am, if you cannot comply with reasonable security requests, we'll have to ask you to leave airport property entirely. We cannot permit disruptive individuals to interfere with normal flight operations." The escalation was swift and comprehensive. Within minutes, what had begun as routine check-in had transformed into a public spectacle involving multiple airline employees, security personnel, and a growing audience of passengers whose travel plans had become secondary to the unfolding human drama. Sarah's livestream was accumulating viewers exponentially, her running commentary painting Zara as an unreasonable troublemaker who simply couldn't accept standard airline policy. The terminal had transformed into something resembling a modern coliseum, with clear battle lines drawn between participants and spectators. Children pressed against tall windows, fascinated by adult drama they couldn't quite comprehend. Business travelers who had been rushing toward their gates now stood transfixed, schedules forgotten in favor of witnessing unprecedented human conflict. "This is exactly why we need enhanced passenger screening," commented one observer, a middle-aged woman whose voice carried just far enough to be heard by surrounding passengers. "Some people simply don't understand appropriate behavior in civilized environments." Her words found ready agreement among several other travelers, heads nodding in rhythmic collective judgment. But not everyone was convinced by the performance they were witnessing. Maria Santos, an accountant from Queens waiting for her connecting flight, had observed the entire interaction with growing discomfort and mounting indignation. "This is completely wrong," she declared to her travel companion, voice rising with moral outrage. "They didn't subject anyone else to this level of interrogation. This is pure discrimination." Her words created ripple effects throughout the crowd, breaking the spell of passive observation that had allowed the situation to escalate unchecked. Several other passengers began nodding agreement, their expressions shifting from curiosity to genuine concern about what they were witnessing. James Wilson, a civil rights attorney who had been quietly observing while waiting for his Atlanta connection, stepped forward with his phone already recording. "You're absolutely right," he told Maria, then addressed the larger crowd with professional authority. "What we're seeing here represents textbook racial profiling, and everyone with recording capability should be documenting this incident." The terminal erupted into competing narratives as smartphones emerged throughout the gate area like digital weapons in an information war. Sarah's livestream was being flooded with comments both supporting and condemning the airline's actions. #racist Skylink began trending on Twitter within minutes, while counter hashtags defending airline security procedures also gained momentum. Public opinion was dividing along predictable demographic lines, but evidence was being preserved in real time across multiple platforms. Tom called for additional security backup, and 3 more officers arrived within minutes, their presence transforming the gate area into something resembling an arrest scene. The show of overwhelming force was intended to intimidate, but it only attracted more attention and more recording devices. Local news crews monitoring social media for breaking stories began dispatching reporters to JFK International. Throughout the escalating chaos, Zara remained centered in the storm, her composure unshaken despite the circus swirling around her. She continued documenting everything methodically: faces, badge numbers, statements, creating evidence that would soon serve purposes no one present could imagine. When David Kim threatened to involve federal authorities, claiming she might represent a security threat, Zara made one final phone call. "Robert," she said quietly, "I believe it's time for full disclosure. Yes, I understand the implications completely, but they've forced this decision through their actions." The conversation was brief, but observers close enough to overhear detected the tone of someone making a decision with consequences extending far beyond the immediate situation. The moment of absolute truth arrived like lightning striking, sudden, brilliant, and completely devastating to everything that had preceded it. Every phone in Terminal 4 seemed to ring simultaneously, every Skylink Airways employee received emergency notifications, and the public address system crackled to life with an announcement that would forever alter how the aviation industry understood power dynamics and corporate accountability. "Attention all passengers and Skylink Airways personnel at Gate 23. The voice belonged to Robert Sterling, chairman of the board of directors, though most people in the terminal had never heard his name or understood his significance. "I need to speak immediately with Miss Zara Anderson. Miss Anderson, please identify yourself to security personnel." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Mark Thompson's face drained of all color as he processed the implications of board-level intervention, calling for the woman he had just threatened with arrest. Sarah's livestream captured her confusion in devastating real time, her confident commentary dissolving into stammered uncertainty as thousands of viewers witnessed her dawning realization that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Around the terminal, Skylink Airways employees began receiving urgent notifications on their work devices as district managers' phones lit up with emergency calls from corporate headquarters. The carefully orchestrated discrimination that had unfolded over the past 90 minutes was about to collide with a reality none of them had imagined possible. Who is Zara Anderson?" Sarah whispered, her phone still broadcasting to thousands of viewers worldwide. The question hung in the air like a blade poised to fall, and her live-stream comments erupted with speculation and growing excitement as viewers sensed they were about to witness something unprecedented. Zara stepped forward with deliberate dignity, and for the first time since arriving at the airport, she allowed her true authority to surface. Her posture straightened with the confidence of someone who had built an empire from absolute nothing and had no intention of being diminished by anyone, regardless of their position or prejudices. "I am Zara Anderson," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent gate area, with unmistakable authority. "I am Chief Executive Officer and majority shareholder of Skylink Airways Corporation. I own 67% of this company, which means I own these terminals, these aircraft, and I am the ultimate supervisor of every employee who has spent the past hour and a half attempting to deny me basic human dignity." The revelation struck the assembled crowd like a physical force, and phones that had been recording discrimination were now capturing the most spectacular corporate power reversal in modern aviation history. Mark Thompson stumbled backward as if physically struck, his face cycling through disbelief, horror, and the dawning realization that his career had just ended in the most public way imaginable. The crowd's reaction was instantaneous and electric. Gasps echoing throughout the terminal, followed by an explosion of camera activity and frantic social media posting as people rushed to share what they were witnessing. The very air seemed to crackle with the energy of a moment that everyone present instinctively understood would be remembered for decades to come. "That's impossible," David Kim stammered. But even as he spoke, his phone was buzzing with confirmatory messages from corporate headquarters. The woman he had threatened with removal from airport property wasn't just any passenger. She was his ultimate employer, and he had just provided her with grounds for the largest discrimination lawsuit in airline industry history. Robert Sterling materialized at the gate with a small entourage of senior executives, their expressions grim with understanding that they were managing a crisis of unprecedented proportions and global visibility. The board chairman was a tall, distinguished man in his 60s, whose presence commanded immediate respect from every Skylink Airways employee in the terminal, though his authority paled in comparison to that of the woman they had just finished humiliating. "Miss Anderson," Robert said with formal gravity, his voice carrying to every corner of the gate area, "I apologize profoundly for the treatment you've received from our employees. This represents exactly the kind of systematic discrimination we've discussed addressing at board level." James Wilson, still live streaming to his growing audience of viewers, provided running commentary that captured the magnitude of what was unfolding. "This is absolutely incredible, folks. The woman they were trying to remove from the airplane literally owns the entire airline. This is the most insane reversal I've ever witnessed in my legal career, and I've seen some spectacular courtroom moments." The reckoning was swift, absolute, and broadcast live to millions of viewers worldwide. Within moments of Zara's revelation, the terminal had transformed into a stage for the kind of justice that typically exists only in fantasy, but was now playing out in devastating real time before a global audience hungry for accountability and consequence. The morning light seemed to shift in the terminal, as if the universe itself was realigning to reflect the new reality. Passengers who had been rushing to their gates now stood transfixed, their schedules forgotten in the face of witnessing corporate history being made. Children pressed against windows, sensing the importance of the moment even if they couldn't understand its complexities. Mark Thompson, Sarah Mitchell, Tom Rodriguez, and David Kim. Zara's voice carried the unquestionable authority of someone accustomed to making decisions affecting thousands of lives and millions of dollars. "You are terminated immediately and permanently. Your actions over the past 90 minutes represent gross violations of company policy and systematic discrimination that has undoubtedly affected countless passengers who lacked the resources or platform to fight back effectively." Each name fell like a gavel strike, echoing through the terminal with the weight of absolute finality. There would be no appeals process, no second chances, no opportunity for explanations or excuses. The employees who had wielded their petty authority so carelessly were now experiencing the consequences of their choices, broadcast live to a global audience that had watched every moment of their professional destruction. Sarah collapsed into a nearby chair, her live stream still broadcasting as tears streamed down her face in front of thousands of viewers who were commenting in real time on her downfall. The irony was devastating in its completeness. Her own recording had provided the primary evidence for her termination, creating a digital monument to the consequences of discrimination that would exist forever in the Internet's permanent memory. Comments flooded her feed with surgical precision. "This is what instant karma looks like. Justice served in real time. And never judge a book by its cover. You never know who you're dealing with." The woman who had tried to shame a passenger for not belonging in first class had instead documented her own professional suicide for millions to witness. Mark tried desperately to salvage something from the wreckage of his career, his voice cracking with panic as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. Miss Anderson, please. There's been a misunderstanding. We were just following what we thought were standard security protocols." His words were cut short by Zara's raised hand, a gesture that carried more authority than any supervisor's badge ever could. "I have comprehensive security footage from the past 6 months demonstrating that these standard protocols have been selectively applied based on passenger demographics," Zara announced, her words carrying to every corner of the gate area and into the phones broadcasting worldwide. What occurred here today wasn't an isolated incident. It was standard operating procedure, and that culture ends permanently right now. The revelation sent shockwaves through the crowd of Skylink Airways employees who had gathered to witness the unfolding crisis. Each one began reviewing their own recent interactions with passengers, wondering if they too had been caught on the cameras that recorded everything in the modern airport environment, questioning whether their own unconscious biases had been exposed by the systematic documentation that Zara had apparently been conducting. Tom Rodriguez, the security officer who had threatened to remove the company's owner from her own terminal, was escorted away by his own colleagues, his 15-year career in aviation security permanently terminated. The man who had spent years applying selective enforcement was now experiencing the absolute enforcement of corporate justice, his discriminatory actions preserved forever in viral videos that would make him unemployable in any customer-facing position. David Kim's phone buzzed constantly with calls from corporate headquarters, but there was nothing left to salvage from his regional management position. His career had evaporated the moment he threatened the company's majority shareholder, and the viral nature of his humiliation ensured that his discriminatory actions would follow him indefinitely, a permanent digital scarlet letter that would complicate any future employment opportunities. Legal representatives arrived within the hour, serving papers on the terminated employees for both the discrimination lawsuit and personal liability claims that could reach millions of dollars. The discrimination had been so thoroughly documented and publicly broadcast that settlement negotiations began within days of the incident, with the employees' own live streams and recordings providing incontrovertible evidence of their discriminatory behavior. But Zara wasn't finished transforming the industry that had tried to humble her. Standing before the assembled crowd and the countless viewers watching online, she made announcements that would reshape corporate accountability across multiple sectors and establish new standards for how businesses address discrimination. Effective immediately, Skylink Airways is implementing a $50 million comprehensive anti-discrimination program, including mandatory training for all employees, independent oversight committees with community representation, and public reporting of all discrimination complaints and their resolutions," she declared, her words carrying the weight of someone who understood that real change required both financial commitment and transparent accountability. The crowd erupted in applause that echoed through the terminal like thunder, a sound that represented not just approval of her actions, but relief that someone with power had finally used it to address systematic injustice. The applause continued for several minutes, building in intensity as more passengers joined in recognition of what they had witnessed. Maria Santos and James Wilson, the passengers who had courageously spoken up against the injustice when others remained silent, were invited to fly first class complimentary as recognition for their moral courage. "Thank you for demonstrating the kind of bravery that makes change possible," Zara told them, her words carrying the weight of someone who understood that transformation required both powerful allies and courageous witnesses. "Your willingness to speak truth to power when it mattered most made all the difference in this situation," she continued. "Without people like you who are willing to stand up against injustice, systematic change becomes impossible. You represent the best of humanity's capacity for moral courage." The social media explosion was unprecedented and global, with #Skylink scandal reaching #1 trending worldwide within hours, surpassing major political events and celebrity news as video clips generated millions of views across every platform. The hashtag became a rallying cry for corporate accountability and systematic change, with users sharing their own experiences of discrimination and demanding action from other companies. News networks interrupted regular programming to cover the story, with CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC all providing live coverage as reporters analyzed the implications of the incident for corporate governance, discrimination law, and social justice. Legal experts weighed in on the precedent being set, while business analysts discussed the financial and reputational consequences of systematic discrimination. International media picked up the story within hours, with news organizations around the world covering what was being described as a watershed moment in corporate accountability. The incident became a case study in business schools from Harvard to Tokyo, demonstrating how quickly discriminatory practices could destroy carefully built reputations in the age of social media and viral communication. Later that evening, after the media circus had moved to other stories, Zara stood in her corporate office overlooking the runway, where Skylink Airways planes prepared for nightly departures. The city lights twinkled beyond the glass, and the steady rhythm of takeoffs and landings provided a soundtrack to reflection. The day had been exhausting, but absolutely necessary, a painful exposure of systematic problems that had been allowed to fester in institutional darkness for far too long. The weight of responsibility felt heavier than usual as she contemplated the implications of the day's events. As CEO, she had always known that discrimination existed within her industry, but experiencing it firsthand had provided a visceral understanding that no corporate report could convey. The casual cruelty she had witnessed, the systematic nature of the bias, the complicity of multiple employees, all of it revealed a culture that had developed despite her best efforts to prevent exactly this kind of behavior. Her phone had been ringing constantly since the incident, with calls from board members, investors, civil rights organizations, and media outlets around the world. The story had transcended aviation to become a symbol of broader issues affecting American society and corporate culture globally. Everyone wanted to understand how such a spectacular reversal had occurred and what it meant for accountability across all industries. The financial implications were still being calculated, but early estimates suggested the discrimination lawsuit and related legal costs could reach hundreds of millions of dollars. More importantly, the reputational damage would take years to repair, despite the positive response to her immediate reforms. The incident had exposed problems that went far deeper than individual employee bias, revealing systematic failures in training, oversight, and corporate culture that would require fundamental restructuring to address effectively. Today wasn't about revenge or personal vindication, Zara explained during her press conference that evening, her words measured and deliberate as she addressed a room full of reporters and cameras broadcasting to audiences worldwide. It was about corporate accountability and systematic change. What happened to me today occurs daily to countless people who lack the platform or resources to fight back effectively. We cannot continue accepting discrimination as an unfortunate reality, rather than treating it as the systematic problem requiring immediate solution. Her words resonated far beyond aviation, sparking conversations in boardrooms, classrooms, and homes across America and internationally. Civil rights organizations praised her response as a model for corporate accountability that other industries should emulate immediately, while business leaders scrambled to review their own practices and prevent similar incidents from occurring within their organizations. The NAACP issued a statement calling her actions a powerful demonstration of how privilege and power can be used to lift up those who lack voice and authority, creating systematic change that benefits entire communities rather than individual advancement. Other civil rights organizations echoed similar sentiments, recognizing the broader implications of using corporate power for social justice rather than personal enrichment. Business schools from Harvard to Stanford began developing comprehensive case studies around the incident, examining not just the discrimination itself, but Zara's strategic response and its implications for corporate governance, crisis management, and social responsibility. The story became required reading in corporate ethics courses, providing a real-world example of how individual actions could create systematic change when backed by genuine authority and unwavering commitment to justice. I'm establishing the Anderson Foundation for Transportation Equity with an initial endowment of $100 million, she announced, her voice carrying across the terminal and into the phones, broadcasting her words around the world. This foundation will provide legal support for discrimination victims, fund comprehensive scholarship programs for underrepresented students pursuing careers in aviation and transportation, and work systematically to eliminate bias throughout transportation systems nationwide. The Foundation's first initiative would be a comprehensive mentorship program pairing successful executives of color with students from underserved communities, providing not just financial support, but the crucial networking opportunities and guidance that often determined career trajectories. It would also establish a legal defense fund for passengers who experienced discrimination, but lacked the resources to fight back effectively, ensuring that future victims would have the support necessary to hold companies accountable for discriminatory practices. Additional programs would include research initiatives to identify and address systematic bias in transportation systems, community outreach programs to educate travelers about their rights, and policy advocacy to strengthen legal protections against discrimination in commercial aviation and other transportation sectors. Dignity isn't a privilege, it's a fundamental human right that every person deserves regardless of their appearance, background, or perceived social status, Zara concluded, her words carrying the weight of lived experience and hard-won wisdom. What we accomplish today sends a clear message that discrimination has immediate, public, and permanent consequences. But more importantly, it demonstrates that those of us with power have a responsibility to use it for justice rather than personal advancement. The video of her speech, delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had just changed an industry, would be watched more than 50 million times across various platforms within the first week. It became required viewing in corporate diversity training programs and was quoted in congressional hearings on discrimination in transportation, establishing new standards for corporate leadership and social responsibility. The transformed Skylink Airways became the industry leader in inclusive practices, with other airlines scrambling to match their new standards and avoid becoming the next viral discrimination scandal. The company's stock price initially suffered from the negative publicity, but then soared as consumers rewarded their commitment to genuine change with loyalty and dollars, proving that ethical practices could indeed be profitable business strategies. The story of what happened at JFK that morning would be retold countless times, but its impact was immediate and lasting throughout terminals, boardrooms, and training facilities worldwide. One woman's quiet dignity in the face of systematic discrimination had become a catalyst for industry-wide transformation and a symbol of what becomes possible when power is wielded with principle and purpose rather than personal advantage or institutional inertia. But the story was far from over. In the weeks and months that followed, the ripple effects would continue spreading throughout American society and beyond, creating changes that extended far beyond a single company or industry. Other sectors began examining their own practices with new urgency, terrified of becoming the next viral discrimination scandal that could destroy decades of carefully built reputation in a matter of hours. The 4 terminated employees faced not just professional ruin, but personal consequences that would follow them indefinitely. The class action lawsuit that followed sought damages not just for Zara's treatment, but for every passenger who had been similarly mistreated over the years, with the systematic nature of the discrimination providing grounds for unprecedented financial penalties and structural reforms. Employment attorneys across the country began investigating other cases of workplace discrimination that had previously been dismissed as isolated incidents, recognizing that the Skylink case had established new precedents for corporate liability and employee accountability. The incident had created a new understanding of how social media documentation could transform individual experiences of discrimination into systematic legal and social consequences. Universities began incorporating the incident into their business ethics curricula, using it as a comprehensive case study in unconscious bias, corporate responsibility, crisis management, and the power of social media to expose institutional failures. Law schools analyzed the legal implications and precedents established, while sociology departments examined the cultural factors that had allowed such systematic discrimination to persist in supposedly progressive industries. The terminated employees' attempts to find new employment were complicated by their viral fame and permanent association with discriminatory behavior. Their names had become synonymous with workplace bias, making them effectively unemployable in customer-facing positions across multiple industries. The incident had created a new form of accountability that extended far beyond traditional disciplinary measures, establishing permanent consequences for discriminatory behavior in the digital age. Meanwhile, other airlines scrambled to review their own policies and training programs, implementing emergency reforms designed to prevent similar incidents from occurring within their organizations. The competitive advantage that Zara's reforms had given Skylink Airways forced industry-wide changes that benefited travelers across all carriers, creating a lasting legacy that extended far beyond a single company's practices and establishing new industry standards for inclusive service. The reversal that began with discrimination and ended with systematic change would be remembered as a defining moment in corporate accountability, proof that sometimes justice does prevail and that everyone truly deserves to be treated with fundamental human dignity, regardless of their appearance, background, or perceived social status. Every person stepping onto an airplane today can do so with greater confidence that they will be treated fairly, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Flight attendants and gate agents across the country received new training, new protocols, and new understanding that their actions have consequences that extend far beyond individual interactions. And in boardrooms across America, executives began asking themselves a question that should have been asked long ago. What if the person we're mistreating owns the company? The answer, as Zara Anderson had demonstrated with devastating clarity, was that power structures built on injustice rather than merit can change in an instant when confronted with the reality of their own contradictions. That transformation, born from one morning's injustice at JFK International Airport, represents the greatest victory of all, proof that individual courage combined with institutional power can create systematic change that benefits everyone, establishing new standards of dignity and respect that will endure long after the viral videos fade from social media feeds. The revelation struck the assembled crowd like a physical force, and phones that had been recording discrimination were now capturing the most spectacular corporate power reversal in modern aviation history. Mark Thompson stumbled backward as if physically struck, his face cycling through disbelief, horror, and the dawning realization that his career had just ended in the most public way imaginable. "That's impossible," David Kim stammered, but even as he spoke, his phone was buzzing with confirmatory messages from corporate headquarters. The woman he had threatened with removal from airport property wasn't just any passenger, she was his ultimate employer, and he had just provided her with grounds for the largest discrimination lawsuit in airline industry history. Robert Sterling materialized at the gate with a small entourage of senior executives, their expressions grim with understanding that they were managing a crisis of unprecedented proportions and global visibility. "Miss Anderson," Robert said with formal gravity, "I apologize profoundly for the treatment you've received from our employees. This represents exactly the kind of systematic discrimination we've discussed addressing at board level." The crowd's reaction was instantaneous and electric, gasps echoing throughout the terminal, followed by an explosion of camera activity and frantic social media posting as people rushed to share what they were witnessing. James Wilson, still live streaming, provided commentary to his viewers. This is absolutely incredible, folks. The woman they were trying to remove from the airplane literally owns the entire airline. This is the most insane reversal I've ever witnessed in my legal career. The reckoning was swift, absolute, and broadcast live to millions of viewers worldwide. Within moments of Zara's revelation, the terminal transformed into a stage for the kind of justice that typically exists only in fantasy, but was now playing out in devastating real time before a global audience. Mark Thompson, Sarah Mitchell, Tom Rodriguez, and David Kim. Zara's voice carried the unquestionable authority of someone accustomed to making decisions affecting thousands of lives and millions of dollars. You are terminated immediately and permanently. Your actions over the past 90 minutes represent gross violations of company policy and systematic discrimination that has undoubtedly affected countless passengers who lacked the resources or platform to fight back effectively. Each name fell like a gavel strike, echoing through the terminal with the weight of absolute finality. There would be no appeals process, no second chances, no opportunity for explanations or excuses. The employees who had wielded their petty authority so carelessly were now experiencing the consequences of their choices, broadcast live to a global audience hungry for justice. Sarah collapsed into a nearby chair, her live stream still broadcasting as tears streamed down her face in front of thousands of viewers. The irony was devastating in its completeness. Her own recording had provided the primary evidence for her termination. Comments flooded her feed with surgical precision. This is what instant karma looks like. Justice served in real time. And never judge a book by its cover. You never know who you're dealing with. I have comprehensive security footage from the past 6 months demonstrating that these standard protocols have been selectively applied based on passenger demographics. Zara announced, her words carrying to every corner of the gate area and into the phones broadcasting worldwide. What occurred here today wasn't an isolated incident, it was standard operating procedure, and that culture ends permanently right now. Legal representatives arrived within the hour, serving papers on the terminated employees for both the discrimination lawsuit and personal liability claims that could reach millions of dollars. The discrimination had been so thoroughly documented and publicly broadcast that settlement negotiations began within days of the incident. But Zara wasn't finished transforming the industry. Effective immediately, Skylink Airways is implementing a $50 million comprehensive anti-discrimination program, including mandatory training, independent oversight, and public reporting of all discrimination complaints and their resolutions. Maria Santos and James Wilson, the passengers who had courageously spoken up against the injustice, were invited to fly first-class complimentary. Thank you for demonstrating moral courage when it mattered most, Zara told them. Your willingness to speak truth to power made all the difference in this situation. The social media explosion was unprecedented and global, with #Skylink scandal reaching #1 trending worldwide within hours, surpassing major political events and celebrity news as video clips generated millions of views across every platform. Later that evening, after the media circus had moved to other stories, Zara stood in her corporate office overlooking the runway where Skylink Airways planes prepared for nightly departures. The day had been exhausting, but absolutely necessary. A painful exposure of systematic problems that had been allowed to fester in institutional darkness for far too long. Today wasn't about revenge or personal vindication, Zara explained during her press conference. It was about corporate accountability and systematic change. What happened to me today occurs daily to countless people who lack the platform or resources to fight back effectively. We cannot continue accepting discrimination as an unfortunate reality rather than treating it as the systematic problem requiring immediate solution. Her words resonated far beyond aviation, sparking conversations in boardrooms, classrooms, and homes across America and internationally. Civil rights organizations praised her response as a model for corporate accountability that other industries should emulate immediately. I am establishing the Anderson Foundation for Transportation Equity with an initial endowment of $100 million, she announced. This foundation will provide legal support for discrimination victims, fund scholarships for underrepresented students pursuing aviation careers, and work systematically to eliminate bias throughout transportation systems nationwide. The Foundation's first initiative paired successful executives of color with students from underserved communities, providing not just financial support, but crucial networking opportunities that often determine career trajectories. Dignity isn't a privilege. It's a fundamental human right that every person deserves, regardless of their appearance, background, or perceived social status, Zara concluded. What we accomplished today sends a clear message that discrimination has immediate, public, and permanent consequences. The story of what happened at JFK that morning would be retold countless times, but its impact was immediate and lasting throughout terminals, boardrooms, and training facilities worldwide. One woman's quiet dignity in the face of systematic discrimination had become a catalyst for industry-wide transformation and a symbol of what becomes possible when power is wielded with principle and purpose. The reversal that began with discrimination and ended with systematic change would be remembered as a defining moment in corporate accountability, proof that sometimes justice does prevail, and that everyone truly deserves to be treated with fundamental human dignity. Every person stepping onto an airplane today can do so with greater confidence that they will be treated fairly, regardless of who they are or where they come from. And that transformation, born from one morning's injustice at JFK International Airport, represents the greatest victory of all.